It's probably flooring it here.
There it is. That's what I was.
That's the light.
Yeah, I think we're recording now.
That's the light, Mary Jane.
You can go.
You can go. That's the light.
Oh, okay. Call this meeting to Parks and Rec,
No, stormwater.
Stormwater.
Stormwater. Sorry about that. Called Stormwater meeting at this time. It's 5 after 5. Where do we go from here? There he is.
It's Earl.
One,
Earl Garvin
Hello.
just showed up.
I was stuck in
We figured you was
Started.
having problems.
pleasure. Once again, my apologies, everyone.
No worries. It's okay.
So you called the meeting to order,
We did.
Ms. Skinner? We do have a quorum. We do have a quorum.
Yes, we do.
Our first item of business is to approve the meeting minutes from the February 3rd, 2025 regular meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a motion? Do I have a
Second.
second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Are there any public comments? None? We'll move on to item number 3, discussion, annual stormwater report.
Perfect. All right. So every year, as a lot of you already know, we have to submit an annual stormwater report to the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation that just basically talks through all of our programs that we run throughout the year that we're required to maintain. So the topics that I want to talk about today, I'm going to try and keep it briefer than I normally do so that everybody doesn't have to hear me talk for a very long time. But the 6 topics are going to be public education and outreach, public involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, and I'll talk about each of these a little bit more in depth so you'll know what they are. Construction site runoff control, post-construction stormwater control, and good housekeeping. So to start, we have our public education and outreach. So we have 3 different groups where we're required to conduct public education, and that's through the public. There's the engineering and development community. We have to specifically target education towards them, and for the employees of the city of Laverne. So for each of those different things, there are different standards we have to meet. So when we're educating the public, we have to talk about impacts on water quality, the importance of best management practices, proper storage of hazardous materials like fertilizer, oil, hazardous waste, things like that, and how people can report illicit discharge. And for the engineering and development community, we have to have at least one event per year where we talk about our ordinances and our different regulations specifically related to stormwater. And then for our employees, we are required to train all city employees in stormwater, where we have to talk about the best management practices, how those best management practices relate to water quality impacts and illicit discharge reporting. So these are just some of the numbers for each of those that we did this year. So for the public, we did 8 total events in-house that were things like stream cleanups, presentations with the high school, some summer camps, and our Creekside Saturday with the library. And then we also partner with Project WET, and they conducted some different education events through their programming as well. And then our engineering and development, we conduct pre-construction conferences for every site before it begins, and we reached 87 different people in those meetings. And then we also have pre-application meetings where we talk about our standards and regulations and what we expect people to submit before they submit a planning application. And in those, we spoke with 42 different people and were able to educate them in that way. And what's really exciting is that all of our city employees have viewed the stormwater training that we released this year with the help of HR, who did a lot of the facilitating for that, which was really helpful. So, and then just so everybody knows, as we onboard new people, that's become part of our onboarding process as well, as implementing that training. So then we have public involvement and participation, which is slightly different from public education because it involves people having to be seated right in front of you. A lot of times people will do education that's like if you send something out, like a pamphlet, and that counts. A lot of our public education and involvement kind of overlap. So a lot of these numbers you'll see are really similar. So we had our 4 stream cleanups, but what you guys do as the Stormwater Advisory Board counts as public involvement because you're involved in this program and guiding what we do. And big thanks to Ashley, who's in this photo. She joined us for our stream cleanups that we had this year, which was really exciting. And the same numbers for our pre-construction conferences and our pre-application meetings because they have to come and see us in person and see our face to hear us talk about our regulations. So the next part is illicit discharge detection and elimination. So just to really hone in onto what illicit discharge is, anything that's not rainwater is not supposed to go down the drain. So if there's anything mixed into it, it should not be going down the drain. That's the most important thing to remember. There are some exceptions. If a pool is unchlorinated, that can be drained. Firefighting activities, water line flushing. There's a complete list of this in the ordinance if you want to see it, but there are a few things that are an exception to that rule. And it is important to know that the reason that we look at illicit discharge and the reason we're trying to track it is because a lot of those pollutants can be really detrimental to our wildlife, our ecosystem, and even our public health. So this is just some of the illicit discharge enforcement actions that we took this year. So we had 4 sewer enforcement actions, which are basically just if we have somebody that is really saying, I don't want to fix that, I don't have time, or I don't want to, that's when we come to say, if you continue to pollute, you're going to have to pay a fine, and then they have to correct whatever private property they have causing a problem. We had 3 oil or grease dumping enforcement actions. 4, this one was a new one for me. We had 4 marble cutting enforcement actions. So businesses in the area that were doing marble cutting as their primary business model, and then they didn't have a place for the discharge of the cutting water. So we worked with them to try and figure out how they could get something implemented to make sure that they weren't discharging sediment heavy water with fines. And we also had 2 sediment violations that were outside of construction. So somebody like that had torn up their yard or had done something that created a lot of sediment in the roadway, typically is where we see that. But when it's not related to a permit is when we handle it a little bit closer to the illicit discharge enforcement rather than construction enforcement. As part of this section, we also have illicit discharge mapping, which we have completed a map of almost the whole city that looks like this, that has all of the different, I would call it structure markers. So each of those arrows shows the flow of water, and the different colors and different symbols are different structures. So the like black square, that's an area inlet or one of the square inlets that would kind of drain into a bowl, and the green are curb inlets, so what you would see in the street. So it gives us a map. So let's say somebody decided to dump into one of the black area inlets, we can see what it leads to, so we can say this is what you're responsible for cleaning, and this is where we need to check all the way to the outfall to make sure that they've done a sufficient cleanup job. Moving on to construction site and runoff control. So at the time that I completed this annual report, we had about 40 active construction sites. So this is a number that changes often. We have sites that close and open very often, so that number might be different now, but that's approximately how many are open right now. And that's so one subdivision would be 1 active construction site. This doesn't account for lots. So if I was counting lots, the number would be a lot higher. But every land disturbance permit requires a pre-construction meeting to make sure that we've discussed the inspection process and the expectations, so that they know that we expect for there to not be sediment leaving the site, and that they're expected to keep their controls up to standard at all times. And we did have, which this number is going to sound very high, but it is important to know because it means that we're watching very carefully what the construction community is doing, because we had 547 re-inspections, which means that's 547 times we said that's not good enough, you need to improve it. And then moving on to permanent stormwater control measures, which is basically if you've seen a detention pond or a retention pond or a pervious pavement lot, that's a permanent stormwater control. So something that's going to be there, it needs to be maintained for its longevity to make sure that it continues operating correctly to improve water quality leaving the site. So we have finished a complete inventory of all 170 ponds in the city. There will be new ponds constructed over time that will be added into this inventory. So in that photo up there, each of those dots is a pond or a structure that needs to be maintained. And the inventory includes who's responsible for maintaining that pond, the status, is it compliant, does it have work that needs to be done, some photos just so you can reference where the outfall location would be, where the inlets enter, and then where it's located. So if you guys ever see a pond that you think is falling into disrepair, this is a good way for us to say, okay, we know who's responsible for that. Let's remind them that there's something that needs to be done. But as of February of 2025, all of the ponds in the city were compliant. There was a very long 2-year process where we said, hey, guess what? You own a pond. And they said, oh my gosh, I've never even looked at that thing before. And then they went and got them repaired. So that project is always going to be happening in the background, but for the most part, everybody has come up to compliance. And then the last section is good housekeeping, which basically means is the city doing their part to make sure that our buildings are up to standard stormwater wise. So we're conducting quarterly inspections on the Parks and Rec facility, the city hall, and the new public works facility, which is brand new. So it's really easy to do inspections on right now. For the new building, the pond maintenance is a big part of what that quarterly inspection is going to look like, going out, making sure that that pond is functional and that it's working the way it's supposed to. But it also includes the salt barn maintenance, making sure salt's not leaving on a dry day, material storage of our rock, dirt. We have a water quality unit on site that we have to maintain regularly, which means we have to vacuum it out and make sure it's not full of trash all the time. And inlet inspections, which is basically just checking the curb inlets to make sure they flow. Thank you. Was I fast? Was that fast today? Okay.
Time you.
Yeah.
Do we
Any
have-
questions?
Do we have any questions or comments for Ms. Alex?
I have some questions about the construction re-inspections and the
Yep.
discharge enforcement. What happens whenever you find someone non-compliant? Is there a shutdown or is there fines?
So do you mean for a construction site?
Either or, construction re-inspection or discharge enforcement.
So illicit discharge is typically a private resident. So that would be first you get a warning to say there can be fines, and then typically because the fines range from $50 to $5,000 a day, depending on severity. Normally that's enough for people to say, okay, sorry, I didn't know, and then they get it repaired. But if we have to do a court citation, then we do. And then for construction re-inspections, typically the inspector goes out once a month, and if he finds that something is non-compliant, he will go out the next week or the week after, and he'll say, did you get it back into compliance? And then it will pass again. We have a system that will automatically schedule a re-inspection when you fail,
Okay.
and he'll work with them to get it figured out.
We have had some stop work orders when after the second inspection, they had not done anything, and we issued a stop work order and shut down the whole site until they got it up to snuff.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any
Always
questions,
watch.
Mayor?
Alex, you mentioned with pools, unchlorinated water. Mm-hmm. But I know it's at least going back like 20-something years, it was the norm that people would pump, if their pool got overfilled
Yeah.
from rain, they would just pump that right into their yard.
So if you wait like 7 days after you put the chlorine in your pool, it's basically unchlorinated at that point. So if you just give it a couple days, then you can pump it. Is my general understanding. I will say I'm not a pool expert. That is what I have been told repeatedly. So
By pool expert.
by pool experts.
That's allowed by both us and the state.
Okay.
Yeah, so the exception list is copied from there. From it.
Okay. Okay. I wanted to ask. I don't have a pool, but I'm like, I know we have tons of them in the community, and if
Yeah.
If everyone's pumping that, then that's a huge problem. But
Yeah, and most of the time, if you wait long enough, they don't have enough chlorine in them anymore to be harmful.
wonderful.
Any other questions? We'll move on to the next item. Discussion, E. coli sampling and future steps.
All right, I know everybody is anxious to hear about our E. coli monitoring and extra things that we did. So, just a refresher of what we found before. So, there was a section of Finch Branch where we had to conduct our, we do 5-year monitoring, and when we went out, we found that the average over 5 different sampling events, the average E. coli measure was 1,250 CFU. The allowable level of E. coli for recreation is 121 CFU. That number is bigger. So that was a concern to us, obviously, so we wanted to figure out if we could determine what the source was of this. So we did some quantitative measuring to see if we can figure out where everything started. So this was the measure originally. This is where we first started measuring. So down here at number 6, this is actually a spring. So the water is coming fresh out of the ground right here. If you notice, the number at the spring when it's coming out of the ground, I know that's kind of hard to read, is 517. So it's coming out of a spring with heavy E. coli, which is unfortunately not that unusual, but makes it more difficult to pinpoint what the source might be in a situation like this. But what we also can see as we go through, which I realize I did this backwards in kind of a confusing way, but we started sampling up here, so this was one. But the stream flows this way. So every time as you go through, generally the numbers get higher. So what this leads me to believe is that as it flows through this subdivision, it's getting surface runoff that must have high E. coli levels. So that makes it also difficult to pinpoint because there are obviously a lot of households here, and there is a lot of things that it could be. So our next steps, the future for this primarily, is to educate the people in that community, to send a letter that says, hey, this is what the stream looks like in your backyard. These are best practices to help us reduce the levels and really focus on how this is how everyone can do their part for a healthy community, just because the numbers say that as it's going through, we're receiving E. coli from the community. So there is more of a long-term plan, because even if everybody were to completely eliminate any E. coli leaving their property at all, the number was still at 500 coming out of the spring. So at some point, it might be helpful to figure out what is feeding that spring. Is there a sinkhole somewhere that has something being discharged into it that is a problem? But this would require a dye tracing study, which can be costly. So it's something we would have to budget for and consider later in the future. Any questions on that?
Yes.
Yes.
So is there anything, can you go back over to
Yeah.
the map?
Yes.
So is there anything the city can do at 6 or at 5 to help filter that out so that as we get into the neighborhood, instead of having increases, we can at least address the source of, the main source of the spring?
So I don't know of anything that does that. I don't know of any filter. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I just don't know of it right now. But I imagine it would be difficult to try and filter through it. Because if you stop what's coming through here, you still are going to have some be added throughout and to me, it looks like it gets bigger when you have inputs. So here you have crossings that have ditches that all empty in, and they get high in those points. So that leads me to believe it's something from the surface. We've checked all of the sewer lines. We've checked everything through there, and we haven't found, there's been no leaks, no evidence of anything like that. So from the city's point, we've tried to really pinpoint what we could be doing. And I'd be happy to look into if there's something that we could do from that
Well, I can
point.
talk a little bit to that.
Yeah.
So anything to do as treatment would be very, it'd be almost non-functional. We would have to pressurize the water to push it through the filters, push it through the activated carbon. So we're building a full, like a sewer treatment plant for the type of erection. When I've been trapped with a situation like this that we had to do something about, all we've ever been able to do is dig a big containment area and pump a honey wagon. So you have to get a driveway to it, pump a honey wagon. It's an ongoing thing forever.
Yeah.
So what Alex is recommending of doing the research of what's upstream, which she's already done, she's camped out up there and looked for trucks and was dumping into the detention basin just off the screen, and she's been Sherlock Holmes up there a little bit. And we just need to continue doing that.
Figure out what the source is.
So what is the natural number that you would feel comfortable with coming out of the ground? Obviously, 517 you're saying is high, 110 is allowable.
So
What
typically you would want, springs are very rarely like pristine water because they're almost always fed by some other area. So the value coming out would ideally be still that 121 number. You wouldn't want E. coli to be in your groundwater either. But without knowing what that spring connects to, it's hard to know what's feeding it or what the source might be. So I've looked, there's, if I was looking like off camera, there are sinkholes over here that feed different sections of the stream. They go this way. So it's really interesting topography because it probably has cracks somewhere that's sending it a different direction. It could be miles away. It could be in a different city, the sinkhole that's feeding this spring. So that's a complicated process determining that.
And let's go from 5 to 2, are all those homes, let's go all the way to 1, 5 to 1, so are all of those homes on city sewage, or are they on septic, or septic tanks?
I am 98% sure that all of those are city sewer.
Because I know we have some septic tank areas above 1.
And there is one over here that had a issue with the septic tank at some point. We did check in with them, but that's also down,
Wrong direction.
it's up here, yeah. So I checked everything over here. I'm really trying hard not to hit Mike with this laser pointer.
They'll chase it like a cat.
I've checked this direction. This is all city sewer, and then this section over here is sewer. And they've cameraed all the lines in the surrounding area and haven't found any cracks, anything. Because I was like, Shane, these numbers are crazy. We've got to take a look. And he cameraed all of it. I know he looked at all of it. He was like, I've checked everywhere. I cannot find anything. It is a mystery.
That is a mystery.
Yeah,
That is
not a fun mystery.
It would be very nice to get that number down. Has the numbers on E. coli come down across the city over the past few years, aside from this situation?
I hope so. They seem to be down in the Hurricane Creek area. I think that is an effort of repairing some of the manhole covers that we had over there, and I think working with Metro to make sure that they repaired their manhole covers on their
pump
site.
station, yeah.
And their pump station and all of that to make sure that it was operating the right way. And they seem comfortable now with the numbers. So those have certainly, I think, been better over time.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, the levels that this is at, would it be safe for an in-person cleanup?
It's one of those things where, yes, but no. I don't recommend like getting into it. I would say wear gloves and you would want to shower and wash your hands and do all those things after, and you'd want to wear eye protection to make sure you don't get anything in your eyes. I would not recommend having a stream cleanup there. And doing a cleanup, trash isn't really the main thing that's causing it. It's more bacterial things coming from somewhere.
And then do you know what actions that we can take now to ensure that we have funding to get this taken care of later?
Talk to your board and mayor. and
Yeah, there we
aldermen.
go.
Is to say this is something we as a community feel passionate about, would want to get taken care of, things like that. Because it's, and dye studies have they can be costly. There are some resources locally that do a lot of dye studies. So Murfreesboro, I know, has done a lot. So they would be a good connection for us to figure out how. They've done them in Laverne before too. So we have connections where we could figure out how to do them if we needed to do that or got approved to do it.
Any other questions, comments? Lastly, with the number being at 1413 on one, would it be prudent to maybe a public notice or a sign for
And
the
that's
kids?
what so the letters going out to all of the homeowners, that's gonna go to everybody in this general drainage area. So they would all be notified of the higher levels.
Please don't play.
Not to swim.
Yeah, that was, a
Particularly at-
consideration that we had taken.
Particularly at one, I've seen kids playing in the summertime in the water after a rain or so on and so forth. So at least some slight warning
Something
to,
saying, like, this might not be the best place.
might not be a great idea to swim
Be a
here,
good idea, absolutely.
if you don't mind, at least
Yeah.
look into it.
For sure,
Any other questions or comments on this item? And thank you very much on that.
yeah. And I'm always happy to answer questions on that later too, if you guys think of anything.
Yes, ma'am. And item number 5, recommendation to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, amend the stormwater management ordinance to adopt TDEC minimum buffer requirements.
Okay, so the mayor came to us with this recommendation, staff, and we, the three of us, sat down and talked about it at length. And we thought the best way to present this to y'all would be for the mayor to present the option of changing our ordinance, and to Alex then take the position of why the ordinance is there and why it's a good ordinance. So the mayor is going to go first and make his presentation, followed by Alex.
You want me at the podium, sir?
No, sir, please, from where you are. Thank you. Name and address for the record, though. No. Thank you, sir.
So, and I've slightly modified this a little bit since we've talked, is,
My PowerPoint might not be up to date then. I can't, no, sorry.
I warned you beforehand. So, really what I want to do is something similar that we've done with some of our other ordinances that we have across the city, which is specifically with adopting things that the state requires us to in state numbers, remove our section of it, point directly to the state. That way, whenever the state makes a change to it, it's not going to have to come back through, it's not going to have to be restudied by the city, and it immediately will be changed because ours points to that. Jules, we did something like that with one of them recently. Do you remember what it was? It was some kind of fee, maybe.
Yes.
Well,
It was that fee. I'll think of it soon.
but as a result, every time it changes in this with the state, anytime they make a change, the city doesn't have to then be on the lookout for said change. We don't have to look at any of that. It is just automatically changed. With this specific one, we changed it years and years ago, and we changed it when the state was in the process of changing theirs. And we thought the state was going to one level, and so we adopted one level, and the state actually went to a different level. And since then, it's actually not been touched. So what I'm proposing is we get the city out of that, we point directly to their TCA. That way, whenever it's changed, instead of us having to monitor it and to see that it's been changed and then go through the process of changing it through one board, through another board of mayor and aldermen, through another, that we point straight to theirs. It changes right whenever they change it, or right whenever it goes into effect that they've changed it. That's what I'm proposing. It takes a lot of the work out of it, and it makes it so that when it goes into effect at the state, it's the same for the city.
So basically a caveat giving the ordinance the approval to adopt any amendment the state makes to reflect our ordinance.
Well, with us, it's this one, and I'm sure there may be more, but I dare not touch more from Alex.
Until she speaks.
This is,
But it would, I mean, this is dealing with stream buffers specifically. So
My-
if there's others that we can look at over the course, great, because I'm all about efficiency and, you know, taking that work out of it so that if we're already going to do this, put it into effect. Miss Alex, refute.
So, primarily what I want to do is just talk about what our current water quality buffer policy is and what the state buffer policy is, so that you all can see the difference between the two, and then discuss a little bit of the reasoning behind why we have the policy that we have. So first, if we're talking about our current ordinance buffer, and then we made a few changes to it in 2023, but a water quality riparian buffer is basically undisturbed vegetation that is ideally native, but not always. It really is just an area of growth that's allowed to freely grow along a stream-side habitat in a project. So there are a lot of benefits to a stream-side buffer. Primarily, they provide structural integrity to the stream banks. They prevent erosion and things like that, but they also allow for stormwater infiltration, canopy cover, evapotranspiration, and things that help to create a healthy waterway. And this is actually a photo of one of the streams in Laverne. This is with a full 60-foot buffer, and it's actually in the middle of an industrial area. So when you have these 60-foot buffers, you really can see you have a healthy water system that has the shade cover. It's got a mixture of understory and overstory. It gives it a chance to be like a fully well-rounded area. So then this is just a chart that's talking about the different benefits that you receive from having a buffer and at the depth at which you receive them. So some of the notable ones are you get bank stability, you get excellent aquatic habitat, which you start to get those things at about 30 feet. But as you move down the chart, you see there's different benefits like soluble nutrients where you'd be removing fertilizer, things like that, or you get flood control at about 60 feet. And we'll revisit that a little bit more later, so you don't have to memorize it yet. So first, I want to talk about TDEC's minimum buffer policies. So what they bare minimum require. And this, I'm going to try not to get too technical with any of it, and I'll define a few terms after. But so first, when you're talking about waters with available parameters, which basically means a waterway that's not impaired. So a healthy waterway, or if you have an unassessed waterway. So something that you may have found on your site that had never been monitored by the state before. If you develop on that site, you have to have an average buffer width of 30 feet, but you can only go down to 15 feet. And then if you have a really exceptional Tennessee water, or you have an impaired waterway, you have to have an average buffer width of 60 feet with a minimum of 30 feet. So just a few things of note while you're digesting all of those numbers. So, that didn't work. But so an example of a 15-foot buffer. So this area right here could be an example of a 15-foot buffer where you don't have a lot of overstory. You're not getting any shading of the waterway. It basically is a small area that has growth, but it's not really a complete buffer system. And then this is a image to kind of show the example of averaging. So right here is the stream bed. And then if you were to measure, like you need, so let's say you need to have a buffer that is an average of 30 feet. This side, all of these widths would have to average to 30 feet. So you could have, I'm going to have to test my math skills here. But if you had 60, and this was 45, you'd have like a 52-foot buffer in that situation. So you'd have to extend some of your other ones to meet the average that you need. But then if you have this side, which is basically flat and going straight across, if that was 30 feet, then you just have a baseline 30-foot buffer, if that makes sense. So then going on, I want to talk a little bit about what the city of Laverne's buffer policy is. So it's organized the same way. So up here we have a available parameter, so a non-impaired stream. This is a healthy waterway. Or an unassessed waterway, so one that maybe the state has never assessed before on a site. We have a minimum buffer width of 60 feet, but within the 30 to 60 foot zone, even on a healthy waterway, you're able to do things like implement a public and private walkway. You can do your stormwater detention basins. You can even do your road and utility crossings and linear utilities in that 30 to 60 foot space. So there are things you can do in there. You just can't do things that might affect flooding. So you can't put a house or a building or something in that 30-foot area right there. But we do have some exceptions. And then if it is a healthy waterway or it is one that is impaired for siltation, so basically it already has a bunch of erosion, or it has already been, the buffer has been removed, that's called habitat alteration. Like if they get rid of all the buffer already, then you're limited on what you can do. So in this situation, you would also have to have a 60-foot minimum buffer width. And you can still do things in the 30 to 60 foot area, but you have to average it to 60, which is very similar to what the state's buffer policy is. So if we're comparing the two of these, basically these are the same, so I won't really focus on those. They're basically both 60-foot averages we just have a little bit more exceptions of what you can do in the 30 to 60. And then, so the real difference is up here with our healthy streams and unassessed waterways. Where the TDEC minimum says you can have a 30-foot buffer average with a 15-foot minimum. So you can go down to 15, which I'll remind you is that photo with the short buffers where you get very little protection. And then in Laverne, we have this 60-foot minimum with exceptions in the 30 to 60 foot. So basically, we do not allow the 15-foot minimum. So I would like to reference back to this, the benefits of the buffer. So I don't want this presentation to make it sound like I think that the state doesn't know what they're doing, because they do. They have different priorities than I think that we do. So the state, when they're looking at, they primarily look at water quality. So they're looking at what would benefit bank stability or this aquatic habitat right here. And you can see that most of those benefits come from the 30-foot buffer. So that's where they see those benefits. But from the city's perspective, I think that we have more to look at than that. And one of those important things, I think, is flood control. So what you start to see at a 60-foot buffer is improved flooding control. And I think that's really what we need to think about when we're thinking about adjusting our buffers. So if we're looking, so Laverne's 60-foot buffers, they really allow for better flood attenuation, which basically means that when you have more trees, more vegetated space, it can slow down the peak flows of a flood. You have more things to run into, it can slow the water down. It also can allow for additional storage of flood water. Just in general, there's more space for the water to go when you have more vegetation there or areas that are undeveloped. It also, just from a logistic standpoint, it's moving homes, buildings, businesses farther from the floodway or waterways. So it is also worth noting that the city of Laverne does not have currently a cut-fill compensation in the floodplain like a lot of our surrounding cities do. So what that means is that if somebody comes to build in the floodplain and they were to add fill, we do not require them to create that space somewhere else. But some other cities do have that. But what protects us from some of the effects of this is that we have larger buffers that do not allow development close to the stream. So larger buffers allow us to mitigate some of these risks from not having that in place. So just in summary, Laverne does currently have stricter buffer policies than what the state of Tennessee requires, which I think sometimes, just to mention briefly what Mayor Cole mentioned, is that if they were to change their buffers, because ours are stricter, I don't think ours would change. So ours will maintain itself even through changes with the state. But it's also worth noting that our buffer policy is comparable to cities like Smyrna and Murfreesboro and Rutherford County, who also have higher than the state minimum. They calculate theirs a little bit differently. They use watershed size, which I think if we were looking at changing, that might be an option, some direction. So that's worth noting. And then it also is important to know that Laverne does have fewer floodplain restrictions than a lot of these other nearby municipalities. So this more stringent buffer policy allows us to preserve the health of our waterways, as the state would like to see, but it also allows us to protect citizens from increased flood damage, and it helps us to make a more flood-resilient community.
Any questions?
Who handles floodplain restrictions?
I think that would be Joe White,
It's-
and I.
And he working with me, so,
Yeah.
so Joe White and
'Cause
I.
if ours are looser, they don't need to be, especially after 2010.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm trying to
again-
figure out who handles that.
And we've enforced that. So, but again, you are allowed, FEMA allows you to fill in the 100-year floodplain, but not the 100-year not the floodway. So we just,
Enforce
we
what they have.
enforce FEMA's requirements.
And that was something that we'd talked about, I think, because I also dabbled in the flood, I'm a floodplain manager as well. But we had talked about updates to the flood management ordinance and what that might look like as well, which might be good for some protections for that.
I have a question of unassessed waterways. Is that simply we started building before you could assess this place?
No, so an unassessed waterway, so basically there are a lot of streams that have been like rated by the state at some point, and sometimes you'll go to a site for development and you'll find a stream that you say, oh, we didn't know that that was going to be a stream. It's so something, or it's something that hasn't been assessed for quality
Okay.
at some point by the state, because they'll do like larger,
Yeah.
It's like my backyard. My backyard, when we moved in there, we just saw an open pathway and it was covered in weeds. Everything was knee-high grass. And so you went through and got it all cleaned up. We got ready to start bush hogging through there, and I talked to, back then it was Katie. And she's like, oh no.
Oh, no.
She's like, we didn't have this down, but this is a stream and there's wildlife, so no bush hogging it.
Oh, no.
And so,
I think we used to call those wet weather springs when,
yeah, and that's a lot of times what they are. And it's sometimes it's things that are seasonal, that you wouldn't have thought was a stream. It can be a lot of different things, but primarily it means that the state hasn't assessed it for quality. So it doesn't fall into is it an impaired or a non-impaired stream? It falls into, we don't know yet. Nobody's looked at it for habitat or anything like that, so.
Thank you.
so would this only be affecting our buffer, sir? Our buffer numbers?
yes.
And, okay,
So, I don't know if I'm allowed to clarify or not.
please.
I think are you asking like what the vote?
No,
Okay, okay.
what the numbers that were affecting on the stormwater ordinance, is it strictly limited to the buffer situation or other rules?
For this,
For
I think
this,
it's just for
yes.
this section, it would just be.
And then obviously we'll still have some oversight to protect everything as necessary. And, you know, when thinking of other boards, so when we get our stormwater report, it'll be addressed correctly. And you will be comfortable with it regardless of what direction it goes, according to the numbers? Unfortunately, sometimes we have to be non-biased in this regard, so that's just a general
As-
safety question.
Can I?
Well, okay, so what I would say from a non-biased perspective is that I think from a water quality standpoint, the state minimum buffer would probably be okay. But if you're looking at floodplain protection and other things, we would lose benefits by adopting the state minimum.
And
Please, ma'am.
wouldn't it be easiest to maintain control of this aspect in order to keep things from getting worse down the line? Because at that point, we're reacting to something and not stopping something from happening.
Yes, ma'am. And that's a fair statement.
What do you mean by worse down the line?
Well, he's saying that, we can still keep a watch on this in other aspects, but at that point, we would be reacting to something instead of being upfront, like having control of it up front.
We'd be able to maintain control, period. Because with any ordinance, whether we change it and as I'm suggesting, and point to the TCA on it, or we can always, as a board, and this is both this board and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, decide to change that. So I'm just my thought is efficiency with this. We're not, yes, we're not matching up with the state, but when the state makes changes, like with this one, the thought was the state was going to be here, and they weren't. So we overshot them, and that can happen, and we can choose to overshoot them with other things, or with this. It's completely in the purview of the city, but we would still maintain control regardless. We can alter it at any time. It goes right through the same process.
But we would be erasing that section. We're just handing that over to the state, right?
it's not.
So he's saying to match the state. He wants to, so whatever is the minimum that they set is what we would be adopting.
But I
in
thought that
ours.
we were removing our section of this, so
And
we
then
could.
referencing their section.
Yeah.
But it's also
So
worth
basically, just
noting.
like copy pasting in one, okay.
And
But-
whenever they make changes, we're not having to, at that point, then either do our own study, determine where we want to be, or reconvene this board to make a recommendation to then go before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen a month later, and it makes it so that it's there.
But we are still having to go back through and do that, right? Because we're having to go, well, do we agree with what the state is saying as a board? And do we want to change that of our own volition? So it's like the same work either way, right?
Well, when it comes to guidelines from the state, as far as you can't go below,
That's
but
the,
you can go above. So if the state says 50 feet, you can go 60 feet. If the state says 50 feet and you go 20 feet,
Oh, yeah.
then you can't do that.
Yeah.
So,
it is also worth noting that there are very few municipalities surrounding us that are using the state minimum. They're using other metrics so that they can get increased buffer protections on their waterways as well.
And
That they have not adopted the state minimum.
But as it's written now, we're more strict. If we just leave it alone, I don't think the state's gonna increase to those limits, and I think this is kind of a moot point. We keep things as it is, and if the state does go above our stricter standards, then we can revisit that and probably, no offense, Mayor, 10 or 12 years down the road. I just don't,
I agree.
I like the city's more strict standards much better than this minimum of the state. I don't see what it's gonna save us in the future. Because what if 2 years down the road, we find out, oops, the state minimum is really not working for us, we're gonna have to go back, we're gonna be in the same situation again and having the same discussion.
So I'm going to reference, I guess, a little history lesson. If I remember correctly, all of this came about with the stream buffers back in 2010 after the flood.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what brought everything to a head. Was when you looked at the flooding map at the city of Laverne, we noticed that this parcel, and this parcel are, and we still have some homes that are still in flood zones. And we've had some parcels that haven't been able to be used because they are in flood zones, with all due respect to those property owners. But that's kind of why we set it at 60 back then, is because 60 foot seemed to be about the average of where our problems were. Yes, there are some neighborhoods that we ran 120, 140 feet out from center line, but we've maintained it. And over these past 15 years, anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that our flooding situation has considerably diminished. When we had, I'm not saying the stream buffer was part of it, but our responsibilities, our actions, and our staying on top of it. And that's why my question was, we'll be adopting the state minimums, but will we still have the caveat at other boards to say, I don't feel real comfortable about this? Will we be able to say we still want that 60-foot line? Is that in our power? And I don't know if that's
with planning, it's an ask, like they've told us with where we can ask for anything, we can't demand anything.
Right,
not
so,
be able to
so
require
I think we've got two members that are saying, let's, proceed with caution. I guess end question would be, how many parcels do we have that would actually be affected by the 30-foot buffer? Because I don't think we have much left to develop that hasn't already been through stormwater and such.
The buffer affects redevelopment as well as development, because if you do a redevelopment along a stream bank, you would have to implement the buffer. So there is a lot of benefit to be gained in places where they potentially need assistance with, I shouldn't say assistance, but need improved water quality or improved flood attenuation if you can create a buffer in those areas where you're developing. But I do think it's worth mentioning that it would be very challenging to ask somebody to do the larger buffer if everybody else wasn't held to the same standard. People are really only going to do the minimum buffer that you ask them to do.
And that would be my concern, hence how many parcels do we actually have left that it would
I think,
affect?
so there would be,
Basically,
it's going to
anything by
continue
stream.
affecting parcels for a long time.
So if you have a stream this is not a case right now, I'm just using a hypothetical, but if you have a house that's being torn down and then something new is being built, if they built it, and it was a smaller buffer back whenever they built it, and it's a bigger buffer, it'll be a smaller buildable lot or buildable area.
And I'll say too, I've seen the trend that I have seen in housing is creating mini houses on one lot. So that would be a huge problem there.
Or a lot of houses in one development.
Yeah.
Well, I know where they're building the new houses in behind me.
Mm-hmm.
They have cut or did away with one of the streams that would come down into my stream. So, I mean, am I gonna be flooded?
So the places behind you would have, you have a 60-foot buffer on a stream that is defined as a stream by the state. So if you have what is a wet weather conveyance, that would not have buffer protection on it. Unfortunately, in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. But so a stream that is defined by this, as from a hydrologic determination from the state, if it's determined a stream in the city of Laverne, it would have a 60-foot buffer unless they were doing one of the 30 to 60-foot buffer exceptions.
So there's nothing we can do about it.
It depends on it. When it comes to streams are especially with TDEC, whoever's evaluating it determines if it's a wet weather conveyance or a stream, and you can have differing ideas of it, and whatever TDEC winds up determining at the end of the day is what TDEC determines at the end of the day, is what I've found out so far from working with them. So.
And I guess let me summarize. So the only real effect between ours and the states is the 15-foot. And the 15-foot is still allowed to have the walking trails, et cetera, just no homes.
So we don't allow a 15-foot minimum at all. Ours is pretty much 60 feet across the board, but there are some exceptions in the 30 to 60 foot.
Okay.
So
The states is
we have,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
sorry, let me start over. So ours is basically, we have 60 feet across the board, but we have some specific exceptions in the 30 to 60, and we do averaging if it's a really clean water or a really impaired water. So the big difference comes when you have, when you're looking at the TDECs, where they have a 60-foot average. We basically have the same thing for really, really clean water and impaired water. But when we're looking at regular, like a totally non-impaired stream, but an unassessed water, that's where we see the difference. Because TDEC, their minimum The minimum stream buffer they have is 30 feet, but you can average it by going, so if you go down to 15 in one place, you have to do like 45 in another, but you get those really poor quality 15 feet buffers. And then, sorry, maybe that was an opinion. And and so when you look at Laverne's is a 60-foot minimum, but we allow you to go down to that 30-foot like they have, but we have limited uses for that. It used to be that we were just 60-foot period, point blank, no more, but in 2023, that's when we added the special exceptions for if you wanted to do a walking trail or your infiltration-based SCMs or your utilities. That was the main thing, is because a lot of times utilities are run close to the stream because that's where that's the lowest area. So a lot of times they're cutting completely into that 30 to 60-foot buffer for the utilities. So we allow uses for that in certain cases, if they're able to. But in situations where you don't need that, it's beneficial to have the 60-foot.
Very good. Mr. Gary, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I do have an opinion, so we're going to go into opinion zone now, if I'm unbiased. So the filling in the floodplain and the buffers are completely tied together. So what we've got, what the city did, was they said, well, we're going to allow filling in the floodplain, which really mainly affects industrial commercial areas. That almost never comes up in a residential area. And so you basically, the commercial and industrial get the benefit of a bigger lot. Now, on the flip side, we had the bigger buffers in order to offset that loss in floodplain storage or flooding potential. But now we get the benefit of going through our residential areas, these wide green areas which allow walkways and stuff. So it looked to be, if you add all the benefits and costs together, the majority of the benefits came with the 60-foot buffers and the not having the filling in the floodplain requirements or swapping in the floodplain requirements. And I give that to you as my professional opinion as one engineer.
Very good. Any other questions and comments? Everyone informed and ready?
Oh, I want to hear the opinion of our Public Works Director, since he's here,
that's-
lending his expertise.
Sir, I generally have the pleasure of calling someone to the podium at least once a meeting, so today it's you. Name and address and position.
My name is Mike Deeds. I reside at 2401 Kintner Halls, the O'Reillyville, Tennessee. And so,
I didn't foresee this. It happens.
the best American uniform.
He asked me directly if anybody would be at the podium tonight, and I said no.
Thank you.
I'm gonna scare you out again.
You're not
Please,
the
sir.
first person who said that.
All kidding aside, yes, Public Works Director and Stormwater has now fell under our division. So this is an area that I'm not 100% familiar with. So personally, I would have to lean towards the experts over here that deal with it on a daily basis. Everything they've said, sitting in planning meetings and development meetings with the engineers, et cetera, I understand the need for it. And obviously, I'm a water quality person, so if it improves water quality, then I'm going to vote for it every time, to be completely honest. So that's where I'm at.
Very good.
All right, thank you.
Do we have any questions for him?
To clarify, that means he likes our buffer policy.
Thank you. So with that, we will be entertaining a motion. We will be sending a favorable or non-favorable recommendation to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen,
Or we can choose not to send a recommendation.
or we can choose not to send a recommendation at all. It must be made in the form of a motion. So we will entertain a motion.
I move that we do not send a recommendation to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
We have a motion to not send a recommendation. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor say aye.
No,
All opposed?
I. No,
Motion.
sorry, I'm speaking at the wrong times. I've not done this before.
So what is your vote, ma'am?
I think that we should send
So on this section, we will vote yes or no. So we have a motion on the table. We have a
Not
second.
send one.
So yes or no?
No.
No, sir? No? Now I'm confused.
No, I'm
So-
confused.
We're voting to not.
If you're voting not to send a recommendation, you would vote aye. If
Thank you,
you're
ma'am.
voting if you want to instead send a recommendation, you vote no.
Okay, so.
Okay? Clear as mud?
Yes.
Yes, all right, so we're going to try this one more time with roll call. Please state your name and your vote.
Ashley, and I vote no.
Okay. Sir?
Lee Hoagland, I vote aye, as not sending a recommendation.
Thank you, sir.
Mary Skinner, yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Mayor? Cole?
Aye.
Name and vote?
Jeff Moss, aye.
Thank you. All right. We will not be sending a recommendation to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Thank you for the discussion, everyone, and it was very informative from everyone. So we greatly appreciate the thought and recommendation.
The gasp out me.
We will not be sending recommendation to Mayor and Aldermen on item number 5, Ms. Williams. And any other questions or comments? Thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned.